Our TSN hockey analyst, Frankie Corrado, is just about to leave for his honeymoon, but he insisted before taking off that he would chat with us about the remaining needs of the 7 Canadian teams out there. Frankie, you're the best for doing that. I know your honeymoon's going to be great, but we got to get to this first. Vancouver had a clear need this offseason. It was defense. You and I talked about it the other day. They addressed it by signing the veteran Ian Cole. They addressed it by signing Carson Soucy out of Seattle. Does this team still need more help on D, though, Frankie, or are there other areas that they should be addressing in Vancouver?
For right now, the help should be on D for Vancouver, and they shouldn't be done adding. The problem is that the management group there has inherited a cap situation that's less than ideal, so they do have to move some money around if they can sign someone on the back end. But that would be the priority still. And you know, it's one thing to acquire defensemen, then it's another thing to make sure that they're slotted appropriately within the lineup. So I take a look at Vancouver's D-core and how it could shake out. Like a guy like Ian Cole, it's a good signing, but it's a good signing on the third pair, not on the second pair. And even when he was at his best in his career playing for the Pittsburgh Penguins, winning a Stanley Cup, like that's a third pair guy. So it's imperative that they make sure that everyone's slotted appropriately. And if they can bring in one more defenseman, it just kind of helps that process go along.
You know that the Calgary Flames fans wish a little more was happening in Calgary. It's very quiet since Tyler Toffoli was dealt to New Jersey, Frankie. They're still trying to sign Lindholm. They're still hoping, but you know Noah Hannafin's out the door. And Noah Hannafin, speaking of defensemen, is a guy who's available and yet has not been traded yet. What do you make of the situation in Calgary, and what does Craig Conroy have to address?
Do everything you possibly can to sign Lindholm. That's the big one for me. And then once you get some clarity on that, then you can make other moves accordingly. But I'd be doing everything I possibly can, like within reason, right? You're not going to overpay someone $4 or $5 million just to be on your team. At some point, there's a number where you say we're going to walk away, but do everything you possibly can to keep Lindholm. He's a really good two-way centerman who has some offense. He's responsible defensively. And then it's up to Conroy. Like, is he going to go into the season with Backlund and with Hannafin? He can. Like, it's not out of the norm for teams to bring players into the season that are going to get to UFA at some point. Ideally, you would like to get something for those players. And if you do decide to get something for them, I thought the return on the Toffoli deal was fine. Like, Sharon Govich is a speedy winger who can play off the rush. They need some of that. Yep. So if you decide you're going to move on from guys and you're going to make those moves, that's the type of player that they need to bring in. A lot of speed and some players that can be creative, but it all starts with Lindholm first.
The Edmonton Oilers, according to FanDuel, best odds of any Canadian team to win the Stanley Cup next season. They added Connor Brown, that everyone pretty much agrees universally is a terrific fit for this team. Connor McDavid's old junior buddy. What's left for Kenny Holland to do, Frankie, to get them over the hump here?
Two things for Edmonton. So we saw Nick Bjugstad leave, and we saw Kostin leave. And Kostin essentially had a pretty good season, so he priced himself off of that team, which is fine. But in Bjugstad, they lose a big power forward with some scoring punch. In Kostin, they lose an energy forward with some scoring punch. So I understand that Connor Brown comes into the lineup, but I would still like to see it as like some size up front and that energy kind of player who can play lower in the lineup, give you a little more scoring punch. And I would say this as well on the back end. We talked about the Vancouver Canucks and how they brought in some defensemen, and it's going to be a nice fit for them, but they need to slot those players a little better. When the Oilers brought in Mattias Ekholm last year, that left side of the ice, everyone was slotted a little bit better. I thought Mattias Ekholm did wonders for Evan Bouchard. If the Edmonton Oilers can do that same kind of thing on the right side of the ice, maybe Cody Ceci is not your first pair defenseman now. Maybe Evan Bouchard isn't relied on as much at 5-on-5, and he's going to play a lot of power play, and he's going to do very well at that. But if they can slot the right side of that D-core a little bit better, just makes the Edmonton Oilers that much better of a team and a little more insulated when you head back towards the net, regardless of who's in net, Skinner or Campbell.
Great points. We're heading east. The Winnipeg Jets. You got to love Kevin Shovel-Dayoff. Backed into a corner with Pierre-Luc Dubois. Comes out with a terrific return. Blake Wheeler's gone, the former captain. So now you have two potentially disgruntled people left, Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuyck. Now, Scheifele, we aren't hearing much on him, but Hellebuyck, things have kind of gotten quiet too. But is that all that Cheveldayoff needs to focus on, Frankie, or does he need to start moving on and looking at other pieces of this team?
That's pretty much it for me. Like, what are you going to do with Mark Scheifele? What are you going to do with Connor Hellebuck? And when are you going to do it? Ideally, you'd like to move on from those players and get a return similar. Like, the Dubois return is a home run. Like, it's a grand slam. It's a fantastic return. You might not get that kind of return on both those players, but you should get something of that caliber where it sets you up for your future. Some young players that you'll be able to control RFAs at the end of their contracts and kind of have them in your system. Now, that is in a perfect world. If you go into the season with Scheifele and Hellebuck, it's not the end of the world, because then you can kind of see where your team is at. Maybe the Winnipeg Jets are a team that look at it and they say, listen, at the deadline, we are sellers. And now Scheifele's very available. Now Hellebuck is very available. And you kind of kick the can down the road that way. But at some point, I'm sure they would like to have some clarity and find a very good return on those two players.
You know, for a team that was so busy over the last few days, Frankie, the Toronto Maple Leafs still have a lot of work to do. Not just on the ice, but with the cap gymnastics of being $8 million over the cap. We'll see what happens in that potential second buyout window with Matt Murray. But is it just the cap gymnastics that Tree Living has to figure out right now? Or in your opinion, does this team still need to tinker a little bit, especially maybe on the blue line?
It is not just the cap gymnastics for the Leafs, although that's a big part of it, and moving on from Matt Murray and moving on from that money would be ideal. I would say this, so they bring in John Klingberg on the back end, and I think that's fine. Like, he is an offensive defenseman, and I'm actually excited to see how he's going to do if he gets time on the first power play unit with Matthews and Marner, and see how that looks. And just to see his game in Toronto, right? Like, they've really turned into this defensively sound team, and at times it can look boring watching them play, although that does play into their favor. Like, when they are a boring team, they're a pretty good team. But with Schenn going out the door, they need someone like that, like a big, tall, grizzled veteran defenseman who can clear the front of the net, who can break up the cycle down low in his own zone. They're going to miss that presence, and they need someone like that. And when I look at the UFA market right now, I don't see that player. And on Saturday, when free agency opened up, that player was in high demand. So I imagine that's something that if you want to address it, it has to come in a trade. It may not come now. It might be something that gets addressed during the season or at the trade deadline, but it is imperative that they get that kind of player, a big, rugged defenseman who can play physical and break things up in the defensive zone if they want to make any kind of noise in the playoffs.
Pierre Dorian's had an interesting offseason, Frankie. He addresses finally that goaltending situation in Ottawa with Joonas Korpisalo, really solidifies that over the next 5 years, and signed Travis Hamonic to another year on Tuesday, which I like. You know, he's fitting in really well there, you know, and he's a veteran, and he'll be great there. But the Alex DeBrincat situation continues to hang over this team, doesn't it?
It does, and I like the moves that Pierre Dorion made. I think shoring up the net position was going to be a big deal for him, so he takes care of that. Now it's up to Joonas Korpisalo to take the ball and run with it. And ever since he made that move for Jacob Chychrun, like, the blue line does look different. It looks a little more stable. There's some puck moving ability. There's some defending ability. Bringing back Travis Hamonic is not the worst thing in the world if you use him properly. So when you do eventually move on from DeBrincat, you'd like to bring back some scoring punch, because that's a player you traded for because you needed that scoring punch. And even though it was a down year for DeBrincat, you saw what he can do on the power play, and you saw at times what he could do at 5-on-5 as far as putting the puck in the back of the net. Like, that is an element that will be missed on that team once he does eventually move on. So I'd be thinking, listen, my return can't just be futures and prospects. It needs to be someone who can help my team within that same age demographic of the top six outside of Claude Giroux, but someone in that kind of realm that can help add a little scoring punch. You're not going to find someone as potent as DeBrincat, but someone who can still put the puck in the back of the net on a second power play unit and contribute at 5-on-5.
And for Kent Hughes and the Montreal Canadiens, and I know you've watched a lot of Montreal games over the past year, Frankie, it's an awkward time, isn't it? You're still sort of in a rebuild, but you're almost ready to transition out of that rebuild and start to contend again. You've got Caulfield locked up now. You brought in Newhook from the Avalanche. What more do you feel Kent Hughes should do as we head into the next season?
I look at Juraj Slafkovský, and Jay, you and I talked about him a lot last season, and it was an interesting move the Canadians made, keeping him in the NHL all season long when they had other options. They could have sent him to Europe. They could have sent him to the American Hockey League. They chose to keep him around. And looking back at it, I can understand it. I can, because you have Marty behind the bench, and as long as internally you didn't set the expectations sky high for him, you kept the expectations reasonable, then everything outside of the organization is just noise. Now, what I would like to see the Canadians do is add someone up front who is a veteran guy who's been around, who can be somewhat of a mentor for Slafkovský. I think when I look at the lineup right now for the Habs, it's a lot of young players. It's some guys in Hoffman and Armia that are still there. You know, they're good players, but I would just love to see that ultimate pros pro be there. And it's different when it's a coach or a coaching staff that's doing the mentoring and someone who's in the locker room next to you every single day, on the practices, on the bus, on the plane, on the team dinners, all that kind of stuff. Like, I just think Slafkovský could benefit from that so much. And, you know, you take a look around the league, there's got to be someone who fits that bill for that team who can really help bring this young player along. You draft a guy first overall like that's a very important piece to the puzzle for the future of the Montreal Canadiens, and you need to nourish that as much as you possibly can.
We've gotten through all 7 Canadian teams, and now it is time for Frankie to head to Europe for his honeymoon. And Frankie, you've been great to us all year. Oh, by the way, Matt Dumba's still out there. What do you make of that, Frankie? You and I have been talking about Dumba. We can't believe he's still out there. He's a serviceable defenseman.
He is, for sure. But it goes back to that Saturday where free agency opened, and we saw like the very consistent, very steady defenseman sign with term and AAV. And the guy who was almost like the high-flying, puck-moving guy who can maybe be a little erratic at times, like that type of player got a 1-year deal instead of a 3 or 4-year deal. Matt Dumba is a very good defenseman, and when he's playing at his best, he does everything very well. He's offensive, he's a punishing hitter, he can play in all situations. It's just the timing of it all. He's coming off a down year, so I think teams are looking at it saying, okay, well, maybe I don't want to commit a lot of term to you. Maybe I can get you at a lower AAV. So I would imagine he's trying to work through all those kinds of things. And then for the player, it probably becomes, well, where's the best fit? Like, where can I go and play and do my best and then cash in, you know, maybe next year or the year after. But Matt Dumba is certainly a very good player, and he would have a lot to offer a team when he's playing at his best.
I'll text you in Europe, let you know where he signs. Thanks for this, buddy. Appreciate it.